Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Let me just give me one moment. Make sure I can see my presentation. So I want to welcome everybody to World Deaf Architecture, Day 2, Session 3. And we're talking about youth and careers. So we're inviting 3 panelists to join us today. We're going to talk about their bio, and then we'll have some question and answer. So we can go ahead and open the presentation, please. So here are our three panelists. Can we have our panelists come on screen, please? We have Mohammed as well.
Okay, wonderful. So Kieran, please wave. Mohammed. Barkri. And last, we have Reem Khurshid. Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to be talking about your bio. If you can, Reem and Mohammed, please turn your videos off. Wonderful. I am thrilled to share your bio. So you were a recent graduate of the University of Oregon with a degree in architecture, a bachelor's in architecture. And currently you are working at Gallaudet University and supporting the deaf space design. During Kieran's free time, she loves to take photography. Thank you, Kieran, for joining. Mohammed, please turn your video on.
So here is our second panelist, Mohammed Fakri, and he was born in Senegal, which is in West Africa. At age 11, he suffered from meningitis, which caused him to lose his hearing. He was raised in an environment with limited resources and accommodations for people who suffer from hearing loss. So he struggled with trying to communicate, and he had to rely on lip reading. About 10 years ago, he decided to move to the United States with his family with no knowledge of English or no background in English. Again, he was faced with challenges, but he rose to the new environment, meeting new people, and was able to manage communication by lip reading. He went to Portland State University from 2015 to 2019, getting his bachelor's in architecture. He then went to Clemson University, getting his master's degree in architecture, and is certified in community building. So architecture is a powerful discipline there, and his dream was to become an architect, and it was really fueled by and driven by becoming an architect. It really was more embracing people who are deaf and also those who can't voice for themselves. So thank you. And next we have Reem. So here's our third panelist, Reem Khurshid, and she's a student at Yale School of Architecture. She has her bachelor's degree in architecture and engineering from Cairo University. Her expertise is architecture and urbanism, and in specific, reading the history between Egyptian and Gulf countries. And an example of her work has been exhibited at Joe Jobliard's Architecture Institute. Her architectures have come up in various platforms, Media Master and Daily News of Egypt. Thank you. You can go ahead and we can have all the panelists open their cameras or turn their cameras on, please. We'll just wait for Mohammed to turn his camera on. Great. Thank you all for sharing your biographies. So next we're going to open up with some questions. So I know that the audience is very excited to listen to your experiences. And we'll start with the first question, which is on this slide. What are some challenges that you face in the classroom or workplace? Do they provide communication access, such as sign language interpreter, captioning services for you? So let's start with Mohammed.
Oh, hi. Hello. So I think that's an interesting question. And when I first started architecture school, it was really hard for me because it was a new experience. Like you are moving from high school to college, and then that was the beginning. Then so I found like it was really hard in terms of how do you get that student the accessibility, the thing he need to be successful in the classroom. And when you look at the studio environment, it is like open and everybody has their own desk. So there is like a visual communication, but that's not the big problem. The big problem is the accessibility for that student. And sometimes I had to, go to disability service myself. And then sometimes they were just, canceling those service because they didn't know how to be up to that with how the classroom was working and like what time we had to meet when we had our presentation. So that was one of the biggest challenges for me when I was an undergrad. And when I went to class school, I mean, it was much better. But, most of the time we just open the curriculum and we say, okay, if you need accommodation, here it is. And then that's it. We don't take the time to ask the student what he really needs. And I mean, that's the job of the professor most of the time. They have to make sure that the student, they have the accessibility, they have those resources right before the class starts so that they won't have to run into problems or difficulties as the class goes on over the semester. Yeah.
So next, Kieran, what about you?
So the biggest challenge for me was definitely communication with the professor. So like, for example, during class, the professor will look away from everybody so you can't read the professor's lips, which is what I'm good at. I'm good at reading lips. So that's the big communication issue. Also, note takers. So like accommodating note takers. Sometimes they're good at note taking, but other times they're not. So it's like you have to accommodate for good note takers, and that could take some time. Also, communication with the professors straightly forward. Some professors, don't show up to the meeting, so and trying to email them is also a hard part. Like they just don't respond. So how do you, get their attention? So it's definitely hard to communicate with the professor, but I have some good professors in my whole college career, so that's pretty good. And yeah.
Thank you. How about you, Reem?
So thank you for having me. I really second what Muhammad and Kiran said regarding communication. And in fact, at Yale, they're providing like someone to live transcribe, just they come into class and they do provide transcription. But at the same time, architecture education is very usual type of education. It's not just about lectures, but we have a lot of tutorials, we have a lot of group projects, we have a lot of cases when the conversation is not just a regular one-to-one conversation, but it involves a lot of team working. It involves a lot of exchange of ideas just right on the spot, and that could be quite challenging to have an interpreter or like to even have a transcriber to need to look at the screen while communicating. And at some moments it could be quite awkward, just to say, wait, I have to read what is on the screen, and etc. And something that like an anecdote that I would like to say, I remember when I was reaching out to the Student Disability Center, like Accessibility Center at Yale, and they told me that I'm basically the first deaf student to be like in 20 or 30, like sorry, in like 20 or 30 years to be accepted into Yale University. So they didn't know what type of accommodation a deaf architecture student would need. They had it in other schools, which is like law and business schools. Regularly, it's just like lectures and sections of attending a regular class. But in architecture school, it could be quite challenging, given that you have site visits, you have to, visit certain locations. It's just a very unusual situation to get a transcriber. And the last thing I would say, that some people, like a lot of people, have this misconception that all deaf people can sign. They're not really familiar with the fact that a lot of people in the deaf community can just lip read. So it's not just about providing an ASL interpreter. It needs a lot of modifications and additions to accommodate the needs. That's it.
Thank you all for sharing your experience. I hear your message, and some of you have become familiar about accommodations and how accommodations are provided, and realize that sometimes you need to educate people. And when you explain to them about resources, they realize, oh, it's not as difficult as they thought, and it's important just to let them know. And look, I mean, we're all here to see what you're saying and keep it in our minds, and we want to make sure that other schools know that and are educated about that. So let's look at the next question. So this question is on the slide here, and as I mentioned recently, actually, it goes back to that. What are some things we can educate architects on? Advocating for more accessible places. So I wonder about your thoughts on this. So let's start with Kieran.
Yeah, so this question reminds me of a short story that happened during college. So there was a fire drill and I didn't hear it. There was no flashing lights. So I was like, okay, well, I just sat in my dorm room instead of evacuating. So I was like, wait, where's the flashing fire alarm? So definitely like advocating for more accessible places, and like maybe doing more visual cues, like, flashlights and flashing lights, wider pathways for people to sign and look at each other. I rely on lip reading, so I have to see the person's face. And if they're walking in front of me, I can't see them, or I can't understand what they're doing. So, accessibility is a big thing. Also, yeah, accessibility, I would say that's the number one I could think of. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kieran. So how about Reem? What are your thoughts?
So when we talk about educating architects, I would like to take this back to architecture education, because sometimes I feel like accessibility in design is taking as a matter of a checklist. It is just like a ramp that you should just add to the building, or it is just like the accessible bathrooms that you should have to in your designs, and that's it. It stops here. It never really goes beyond mobility access or like physical accessibility, and it rarely covers any type of sensory disabilities, whether we're talking about the deaf or we're talking about the blind or we're talking about people with autism and etc. Like these types of disability, I believe, should be really considered as well. So I think it should really start from architectural education by having courses about accessible design just specifically for that, and it should be mandatory. It's not just an elective that people could just choose to whether they take it or not. And I believe such curriculum should cover all the accessible design standards for all disabilities, not just having a ramp or something like that. So
Wonderful, thank you. Next, Mohammed.
Well, I think I really agree with what Wim said, and it is really true. And also, kind of story. I mean, I was living off campus, but I kind of had to do the same thing. Like some of my roommates had to, really call on my door to let me know that this is how I do it. I like to do it in the morning, and then, as an architecture student, those are things they kind of bring me back to, okay, what is architecture supposed to be? And you as a student, how can you help others understand what your needs are? And for me, I really think that it goes back to the classroom, like the curriculum, in general. We don't have to just do a project in a way. We have to make sure that our project are addressing accessibility. It's not like, even doesn't matter what kind of project you are working with, you need to make sure that every time those issues come up, because they are really important. And even if you don't have a deaf or disabled student in your classroom, you have to make sure that you are talking about those things, because that's how you help the professional evolve. That's how you drive it. That's how you bring those things into the table. So for me, that's how I look at it. And I really agree with what both of them said. And my perspective is kind of like the same. Yeah.
Great, thank you for sharing. So I want to remind everybody and everybody in the audience as well. Last Thursday, Karen Brandberg, she was giving the leadership presentation, and she mentioned about inclusive design, and she talked about different individuals who had disabilities, and they shared their experiences and how to educate architects in terms of understanding design that accommodates everybody. And your comments resonate, and I think it's important to be leaders and to stand up and let people know and educate people, and keep people educated for our future in the profession. We need to notice missing accommodations and really try to encourage today's equity, diversity, and inclusion principles. Really, all your comments, I really just appreciate you all sharing them. So let's look at the next question.
So when it comes to teamwork or team projects, what are some of the challenges that you seem to have faced? Let's start with Reem, please.
well, in the sense,
And it can be school and work.
like during group projects, for example, I mean, this is not just about creating a work, it's about how we all communicate with each other, and that involves a lot of phone calls sometimes that I'm not ready to take, and sometimes it's just much easier when you are like you have a deadline and you have to get something done. Like my colleagues or classmate would just forget and decide to make a phone call, which I find it's hard to participate in, even if I'm using like a transcription app or something like that. And also when working on site, it could be really challenging with all the background noise and environments and stuff to be able to contribute properly. But I mean, usually I just try to address the same, I mean, to address my needs over and over until people become really familiar. But at the same time, it could, cause some kind of unease or awkwardness or whatever. But yeah.
Absolutely. Next, Mohammed, please.
Yeah, I think teamwork is really challenging. And when I was an undergrad, most of the project I was working on, they were individual. And then I moved to grad school, and I was in the certificate where I had to, do work out in the community, and the way we had to, design and then build. So that was a big challenge for me. Hopefully, and I mean, fortunately, I had a professor that, they asking me, okay, what do you really need? How do do we put you together with the team? How do we help you, be successful in this program? And I mean, that's, our great first step. And I mean, it's about, changing the culture. Like, you aren't just telling students about what the project is supposed to be, but you are teaching team bonding. You are bringing them together. You are educating them about, okay, what it really means to work together in a team with somebody who, doesn't have the same abilities as you do to, heard the word or everything that's around you. And for me, most of my communication is visual and lip reading. So when I have a project with, I am working on with people who cannot understand me, okay, I am going to go to them and then ask them, okay, what can I do? So I don't feel like it's supposed to be the way all the time. I mean, I might be a original human being, and I mean, that's why I might do things, but I'm thinking about the people who, don't have the same ability to do that, to take the first step, because there are a lot of deaf people, there are a lot of individuals who have a disability, but they don't feel like, okay, I need to take the first step. I really want people to come and ask me, okay, what do I really need? Yeah, maybe I'm not that person, but I feel like that's how we should look at things. We should look out of them and make sure that we are creating an environment where there is team bonding, there is understanding. And for me, that's the responsibility of the educator and the professor and the architect. They have to bring those questions to the table. And if you have a student, you have to make sure that those issues are talking about. You have to make sure that they work together before they start working on the project. And I mean, the semester or the quarter can be short, but maybe it can take less than a week to educate them on what it really means to work together with somebody who, doesn't understand things or see things the way you do. And that's really helped me. And I'm grateful that when I was at Clemson, I had a possibility to be in a program that, really helped me develop that. Yeah, so that's my perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Kieran, please.
Yeah, so communication is a big issue that happens in teamwork. So like, for example, like when you talk to your teammate, you have to understand that you're all working together and everybody has their own roles. And I remember a few times where one person would be confused, like, what are we doing? What's going on? Like, that's a big issue that we have. And also communicating through text, like testing, that's a big technology thing that I really appreciate. So if we have questions, we test each other. But communication is a huge challenge. Also, the environment. So for example, like if we're having a team meeting and I can hear like everybody else and it's hard for me to focus on my team. So I try to, I'm a little bit shy, telling my team, hey, let's go outside because, outside could be raining or cold, So yeah, it's like, how do you work together? How do you meet each other's needs? That's important. We definitely challenge with that. Like everybody has different needs and how do you accommodate them all? That's a big challenge.
Thank you, Kieran. And now I know, Reem, did you want to add to that comment?
Yes, something else I would like to add. Like, I remember many times I really wanted to include accessible design standards into the projects, but not everyone will be on the same page regarding that point, given that we have like a timeline or a submission deadline that we have to stick by. Uh, so I think it has also to do a lot with the deaf culture or like disability culture in architecture school and architecture education for the students to make sure to include these design standards into the work. It's not just about structure that we have to care about, or environmental design standard that we have to care about, but it should be this one as well, so that if you have like a classmate with disability, it would be like a normal process to include this layer to the design development process.
Yes, thank you very much for your comments, Reem. I think that that can be very challenging. Communication can be challenging, but don't let that stop you, and don't let that doubt yourself. I think it's really important to speak up. The earth spins very fast, and the longer you wait, the longer you'll be more maybe scared to stand up for yourself. It takes time to grow up and grow your opportunities, but open communication is a critical point. Just like members of the audience, it's always important to share. Next question. Okay. How can you, as a deaf young professional or student, advocate if you push deaf culture related ideas into accessible design? How about we start with Mohammed?
Well, I think I really like this question because, as a deaf student, it's always important for me to reflect who I am in my project. And then sometimes it might not come up. Like we already talking about the curriculum, I like how we need to change and also challenge other students to think about those accessibility and inclusion and diversity things that are really important. Those are important questions. So, for me, the best way to do it is to always, tell people about who I am and like how I feel like building and really reflect people like me or other. And also the other thing is, deafness is not just about, hurting, because, as architects, we use a different way to communicate with our surrounding, inspire ourselves with projects. Like we look at music or missing all these things. So it's kind of like the same thing with being deaf, It's not like there is one way to do things right for you. But the best way to do it is to being able to communicate with others. So in my project, I make sure that I talk about those things. I bring them to the table. And for me, sometimes people might not be like, okay, I accept it or I understand, but I try to explain to them what it really means, to be somebody like me or maybe work in my shows. You don't have to, but I try to explain to you what it really means. I like how I wanted this building to work so that I can be able to communicate with other people, at the same time live in that space and enjoy it, make friends and those things. So that's the way I do it. And I think it's really helping me to come this far in my education. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mohammed. Kieran?
Yeah, so at my university, I'm the only deaf person in the whole class. So I have to stand up and communicate and educate people from my own experience and tell them, I'm deaf. I need this kind of accessibility. And I did intern for Gallaudet last summer. So I was able to learn some accessible design and try to incorporate that into my design and bring that to my campus, my university. So educating, it's very important to teach, and yeah.
Great. Reem?
I mean, I would second what Hamad and Kran just said, and what I say would be important is just to share, for a person to share their experience and stories. It's important for people to get it from like a hand-on, like first-hand experience of a person, and it's something that I try to do not just at school, at work, but even in my everyday life, for people to become familiar with what it means to be deaf. And it's not uh, just about like communication and very, but even about spaces. Like I can say that this place is not really well lit enough, for example, for me to repeat, like all these kind of comments over the long run can provide a full picture of the needs um, of the deaf community.
Wow. Thank you for sharing your different experiences. I think it's important to share who you are. For example, if you were to throw a rock in a pond, and you'll see that ripple effect. Every time you throw a rock in the pond, the ripple gets larger and larger and larger, and you grow and continue to educate each other more and more. That growth, you cannot grow without sharing your experiences. Once you share your experiences, you get that better wealth of knowledge and experience to grow. We want to meet the needs of accommodating designs, and it's really great to be proud of who you are and not to be afraid. Next question, please. Okay, what does it mean to be deaf or a minority and a student or a young professional in the architecture field and communication access? Kieran, do you want to start with this?
Yes. What it means to be deaf, it means to be proud of who you are, share your experience with the whole world, and let them know that we matter and accessibility is important. And also, we need to be able to provide communication, all kinds of communication, not just verbal, just visual cues. We need to provide all of that to the world and tell them, okay, this is how we're bringing out our experiences to you. So I think educating other architects about our experience will definitely help with the world, like help communicate with the world. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Reem?
I would say that it's an opportunity to be able to show, to stand up and show who we are. It's an opportunity to say that there are deaf architects out there. Like people would think that being deaf means that you can do certain things, but that's not really the case. And I would say it's also an opportunity to advocate for deaf-centered, accessible designs.
Wonderful. Mohammed?
Yeah, I think this like for me is a really important question, because my deafness is a social issue, and the American with Disability Act has been there for like 30 years now. And you look at this conference, by example, you are sitting there and then talking about how architecture can, unscrew the door better. So when I look at it, on both the fact that I'm deaf and I'm a minority student, I'm really proud of that, because that's who I am. But what is funny is sometimes we just, check the diversity box, and we forget that diversity does not just mean, hiding minority or people of color into your architecture firm, or making sure that the studio space is, it is colorful enough. It's more than that. It's also about thinking about those people like me who, I check both boxes. Like I'm a minority at the same time I'm deaf. That's who I am. So it's important to make sure that we kind of change our perspective and educate ourselves more. I mean, it's a lot of work, because architecture, for me, is one of the best professions that is, and that's why I am here. But what is challenging is sometimes it's just, it is hard for me to understand that, okay, we are saying we want more diversity, but at the same time, we are forgetting that diversity is not just about saying, okay, I'm going to hire a certain group of people and then let the other on the side. No, you have to make sure that you are doing the work. You are putting enough effort to bring everybody on the table, and that's hard. So I mean, I am proud of that. And like Wim and Karen said, it's all about communication. But I think most of the work should come when people educate themselves. And I mean, we have a professor that, have been in that field for a long time. They have built a lot of buildings. And some of those buildings, they don't have accessibility. They aren't accessible to people with disability. So how do you, educate those people? How do you tell them, okay, you have been in this profession for a long time, but now you need to understand that, okay, we are in the 21st century and there are things that, we should not let it keep happening anymore. We need to change our perspective. And also, the biggest thing for me is about embracing change, because, we are a young generation. And the 21st century is about us, and whatever is going to happen in the future is about us and the generation to come. So if we bring those question on the table, it's not just for ourselves, it's also for the students that are going to come after us, the future architect. So it's important to, understand that it's a big sacrifice to make, but we have to make that sacrifice and try to educate ourselves more. Yeah, so for me, it's all about education, and listening. Yeah, that's why I'm looking at it.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing your experience. Looking back, 1900s, no technology compared to these days. This is where times of today is more accessible. There's things like social media, more accessible websites, where you're able to absorb a lot of this information. Technology is moving so fast compared to how it used to be. And there used to be a point where there was just limited experiences because there wasn't the technology there. But now we can really take advantage of the technology and how you can make an impact to the community and to across the country, and really open up the eyes of what is out there and about the different cultures, different experiences. And I think it's really important to be considerate in regards to inclusive design. It's not only beneficial for a deaf person, but for a hearing person, but for the diverse population that can enter into a space, and you can't have everything perfect, but you can try your best to make the best recommendations possible and open the eyes of those to listen to who you are. And maybe they'll take your recommendations and maybe they won't. Maybe they need time to learn. Maybe they might be resistant. The world's a giant place and we're a very small community, and trying to influence each other as much as possible. Your comments are wonderful. Next slide.
I think this is our last question. So how or what can architecture school or professional experience in architecture influence you to become successful in the future? And let's start with Mohammed.
Well, I think I am going to go back to why I'm the first place I chose to go to architecture school. Like I said before, I grew up in an environment where I didn't have these resources, and then people didn't really understand me. So I always had to go and tell them, okay, this is how I communicate, this is how I see the world, and you don't have to argue with it, but you have to understand that I am part of this society, I am part of this world, So I always advocate for myself. But what is funny is, growing up, I spent a lot of time into hospitals and these things. And also the environment I grew up in, I didn't see people having everything they needed. So that really inspired me to go to architecture school, And I feel like, when you travel the world, every place you go, they have a specific architecture. That's what distinguishes every part from the other. That's what distinguishes every culture from the other, because there's always architecture. And before you see people, you see the architecture first. So what defines a place really is the architecture. And then you see the human beings living in those spaces. So I think architecture really inspired me to be a better human being. And also look at the world in a different way. It helped me, open my view. I said that, the world is a complex, diverse, beautiful place. But what makes it really beautiful is architecture in general. So that's what will inspire me. And when I am in architecture school or at work, I really like to say, project move from being drawn with a pencil to coming to life. And I experienced that when I was in Charleston in my program. And that was like one of the most beautiful moments of my life, because I was able to experience that feeling of, being able to work in a team, do something, and then see it happen, and put in the work, so that was nice for me. And then the second question, what will inspire me is I believe in humanity, because the world sometimes it gets crazy. And then what is funny is there are a lot of problems happening, but then you look at architecture, it can solve many of these problems. And then as a deaf student, I want to change that. And I really want to advocate for students like me, who don't have a voice, and who, always have to take the first step by themselves. I don't want to see that happening. Maybe I might be resilient enough, but I want to see more to getting open, more opportunities coming, so that the students with a disability or students who are suffering from deafness won't have to experience that. They will have more opportunity open to them and become part of the discipline. Because, architecture is supposed to serve the common good at the end of the day. And you cannot talk about serving the common good by annuating one category of the population. You have to make sure that you incorporate everybody. And what inspired me really is that it's a beautiful discipline and it's the best one there is. That's why I'm here. That's why I really, enjoy it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Reem, how about you?
I think as an architecture student, I would say that it really influenced me to be proactive, to push out my ideas out there, to push out the accessible designs I believe that I need to see out there, because these designs are not gonna come out of the nowhere. Someone has to do them. Someone has to introduce them. Someone has to advocate that this is how a space should be designed. This is how a city should be designed. I grew up in a very loud and busy city, just relying on the visual cues, and my experience of the space is completely different from how a hearing person can experience it. And what I would say that hearing or sounds or like the spatial configuration of a space could be very subjective, and it differs from a person to another. So like I believe that through um, being an advocate or being like a proactive member of the community, I can normalize having these accessible designs out there, and it is not like a complementary thing that we should have in the designs, but it should be like the normal, like a normal process and a normal thing to see in how architects design spaces.
And lastly, I mean, what inspired you to become an architect, Reem?
I think I have always been fascinated by my surroundings, since I relied on visual cues for most of the time. So I would look at everything and observe them really closely. I've been like, I grew up in Cairo, which is very busy, very loud. It has different urban fabrics at the same, at the same, confines. Um, so yeah, I think it came from the sheer observation of the surrounding, that I was always questioning how spaces uh, are created, and why would some space feel very intimate, or why would some space feel very open, given that I couldn't hear what they sound like. It was just like the visual aspect that was very heightened and elevated when I was growing up. So I think, yeah, that's why.
Wow, that's fascinating. Karen.
So I'll start with the second question. What makes you what inspired me to be an architect? Well, I wanted to be an architect since I was 7 years old. I was just building Legos, and I was like, how can, I built from Lego to reality. And so I started out from there, and then throughout my life, I was traveling all over the world, and I was seeing different things around the world that I just thought, does that really help us? Like as a deaf person, how can I make it better for everyone? Like, how can I provide more accessible places? So I started thinking about that and said, okay, well, why not I become an architect and try to help educate people on how to think about accessible, how to think about how to come from my experience, how to educate people. So that's what I wanted to do as an architect. And then I went to architecture school and I realized, okay, well, I'm surrounded by hearing people that don't really have experience in deaf space or have no idea, well, they have some idea about accessibility, but more about ramps, and rather than thinking about, okay, how can a deaf person, evacuate a building? How do they know what to, how do they know, like, when the fires happen and, all of that. So I started thinking about that. Okay, well, I can use my experience and educate architects on that and hopefully see more places advocating for deaf people and also everyone with different disabilities or not, like just, yeah.
Wow, I mean, that's really just so fascinating how you all share such different experiences and your inspirations from such different backgrounds. It's fascinating. I mean, from different backgrounds, different countries. You know, in architecture school, one professor mentioned, what, you could major as you could pick a major. You could be a lawyer or an architect. What would be the most important? And if the person picked architecture, and they explained it because, look, you're designing spaces, you're designing places where people live, and it's a lot of responsibility to design spaces for everybody, the entire community, to use that space, and for the space to fit everybody's needs, fit their experiences, fit their needs for accessibility. In the past, it seemed that it was more focused on self-centric or self-centered design, where now people are trying to think about other people's experiences and think about it from that perspective. And really, what's being taught from different schools is very different. And we're learning that that people are becoming a better person and really trying to influence the next generation and youth of the future. And today, I think, people are thinking very differently than how they thought of it in the past. And hopefully we see some more equity, diversity, and inclusivity in the future, or inclusiveness in the future. So it's not just like a checklist. I know one of you mentioned that. It's, understanding that in the past, when I was in school, they didn't even think about accessibility, compared to today, where it's something that is more front and center. And it's interesting to hear you all share that. And I know that the older generations are hearing that and interested in the experience, and know that everyone needs to stand up. And what's missing is that we need to educate people about improving spaces, and that there's always better designs that can be used every day. So I want to see if we have any audience questions that came up during our discussion. Give me 1 minute. Let me open up one other slide. So I do have a couple questions. So the first audience question is, living in the States, have you been to or been inspired to incorporate aspects of the architecture here in your programs, in terms of your own cultural perspectives? Do you find the opportunity to to bring accessibility to your communities. So I wonder if anyone wants to try to answer that. How about Reem?
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. You can go.
No, you can go ahead, actually, Muhammad. You can go ahead. It's fine.
Okay, sure. Either one. How about Mohammed? Go ahead.
Okay, so I think I did that, and I always do it because I was born in a different place, and I had to move somewhere else. So for me, architecture is just about accessibility. Accessibility, yes, is a big part of who I am. But my project, I in general, like I said before, they are supposed to reflect who I am as a human being, and what I am as a human being. That's many things. I'm deaf, I'm married, and I come from another country. So I try to bring all these things into the table, and some of my projects really reflected that. And I mean, I was very impressed by the fact that, my professor and the people I was working with, they really embraced that because they were curious about it. So I feel like it's always a good thing to bring something different into the field because people are going to like it. Why? Because it's going to bring more questions. People are going to be curious about it. And one thing that, define architect in general is their curiosity, their ability to want to know more. So for me, I really embrace that, and I like it. I like to embrace that difference, and I always bring it into my project. Try to show people something else. Yeah, that's my answer for it.
Great. Karen or Reem, do you want to add anything, or do you want to go to the next question? Or Reem, it looks like you might have something to say.
Yeah, I would say definitely. I mean, I have lived in different places, so I'm usually inspired by the different places I have been to, and being in the state, I find it interesting to tackle the idea of cross culture, like because the American deaf culture is very different from other places, right? It's there are different languages like ASL, British Sign Language, Egyptian Sign Language. We have sign languages everywhere, um, and also the level of awareness is different as well. The level of design, like accessibility in design, it's also different as well. Like you have different codes, you have different ideas, different spaces, different users and experience, and etc. So I would say that I try to learn something from each place I have been to, and maybe you can cultivate all of that knowledge into something that can contribute to my community as well.
That's great. And the next question. I thought there might be a second one. It seems like that might be the only one. One moment. Okay, I think that's it, actually. So really, I just want to thank all of our panelists for answering these questions. It's been really fascinating for everybody just to learn about communication access and the different challenges. I know that we have a little time left. I wonder if there's any comments that you all have before I make our final comments. Okay, so again, I just want to thank all of our panelists for their participation. I know that the audience has really enjoyed listening to your remarks. And I just want to wrap this session up by letting everybody know that we will have at 4:30, we will have a closing ceremony. So John Stanton will have some closing comments. So please join us at 4:30. There will be a link that will be sent out, a different Zoom link. So we hope to see you all at 4:30 at that link. So take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Round of applause for everybody. And thank you all. Bye-bye.